Welcome back to Quilt as Desired. In this particular time, I want to talk about the marking process, and there are several equipment or tools or whatever that enable you to do that. The old-timers just marked with a number 2 pencil, and in the antique quilts, vintage quilts, especially the tops, you can still see the marks. Because the problem in using a number 2 pencil or a regular writing pencil is that it has wax in it, and wax will not wash out in time. So you need to find a marking pencil that has no wax in it and is easy to erase or mark out. I wish I could say this and hold something up is the perfect, absolute perfect, universal marking tool, but I don't believe there is such a thing. Because what works sometimes for me will not necessarily work for you. What I prefer is a chalk or a chalk that has some other compound in it that is washable. There's one on the market that has chalk and clay. They're called multi-pastel chalks, made by one of the large pencil manufacturers. But the thing about this, chalk and clay both are washable and erasable. So there's nothing there that's going to be permanent in your quilt. Another one that this also company manufactures, and I'm a little proud to say that I nudged them a little bit this, is one that's called Sketch and Wash, which looks absolutely terrible, but it marks great, and again, it will erase and it will wash out. I quilted some off-white cotton sateen and marked it with this black pencil, and by the time I finished machine quilting, it was almost gone. So again, neither of these have a binder in it like wax that would make it permanent. Good one that's been around for a number of years is what is called a water erasable fabric marking pen. There are 2 types, and you want to be sure to get the water erasable and not the one that says air erasable, because unless you're a very fast quilter, it's going to disappear before you finish. So it's the water erasable. And I do recommend that when you use these water erasable that you indeed wash it out and not just try to spritz it out, as some would suggest, because if you spritz it, some of that ink is going to go into your quilt batting and it might migrate out later on. A pencil that's become very popular, I've found great success with it, especially with dark fabrics, is the new ceramic lead pens. They're available from 2 or 3 manufacturers. Very good. It's a small lead, but it's very strong. And it marks well on your dark fabrics, as you see here, and then it erases and will wash out later. And I'm using that in the Rainbow Dahlia on the black batik. So this has turned out to be very good. They also manufacture a washable graphite lead that will go into these pens. So again, test whatever you're using first to make sure that it's going to work well on your fabric. Because remember, fabric unwashed has chemical in it, and that chemical may prevent these marks from coming out. There are 2 other very interesting techniques. One is a spray, marking spray, which you can do, and then the other one is a pounce. Pounce, again, has been around. A lot of the old stencils that I find in the antique shops that have holes in them, and those holes were made by a sewing machine without thread in it. Punch little holes, and then you rub some kind of substance over it that would fall through, and then you would use a pencil to mark. Pounce has been around a while. The interesting thing about this particular one is the powder that's in it is removable with a steam iron. So after you pounce your design on, then all you have to do is to spray it. And here's an example of that. I did it on this side, but rather than powder puff it, as you might say, you just need to rub it over, and that leaves your design in. And then it will erase and wash out eventually. Or, as I said, you do your steam. So that's one method, very popular, because One decision you need to make is, are you going to mark the full quilt top before you quilt it, or are you going to mark it as you go? I prefer to mark it as you go, because then I don't have to worry about the lines coming out when I'm having it in the sewing machine, because more rubbing is going to bring the marks out. Another one is the spray, and it operates very much the same way. Again, you need to read the directions on the can here. Hold it gently up on a very flat surface. Just spray. And there it is. These are especially good for hard to deal with fabrics. I had a project I was doing one time in which I needed to mark it. It was a wool fabric, and absolutely nothing that I used would do it until I found the spray. So again, it has its place, it has its purpose, but remember, it's somewhat smells bad, so you need to operate it in a well-ventilated room. Okay, talked about these methods of marking. The pencil, let me just toss these out of the way here and get down to my famous pink quilt. I've used this quilt for all kinds of things, all kinds of projects, because it's turned out to be that. Just a very basic square, not a square and a square, but a string type quilt. The particular method I used is a pattern and template called tube quilting, in which you sew two strips together, sew another two, sew them in a tube, and then you cut a triangle and all that kind of stuff. I won't go into detail about that, but a very easy method to do it. So it became a very quick and easy quilt to do. What I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about that spacing aspect. Remember, I said at one point that when you're piecing the top, you should be thinking about how you're going to quilt it. And this was my example of quilting in the ditch. All the time I was making this, I was thinking quilting in the ditch. But I pressed all the seams open, so I had no ditch to quilt in. So what do? I either take the time and I quilt a 1/4 inch all the way around, which takes a lot of time, or I do something else. So I selected this design right here because it just fits in the space. And then the next thing is, how will I then mark it? And I found out that the spray will work very well on this, because you need something that's going to stay on that. This quilt is also spray basted, and you saw the demonstration earlier in the show. And as I said, this has been spray basted now for well over a year, and it's still ready. If I find that there's too much wrinkle on the back, all I have to do is to hook up the iron and put a little spray on it, and all of these wrinkles then will come out. Now, let me go back to the very beginning and talk about how the old folks quilted. Those quilts I showed earlier are done in the shell pattern, fan pattern, as you see here. The way they did that, and I've sat many a time watching my aunts mark their quilts, they quilted with a piece of chalk and a string. Would decide what size it should be, and in this case I want to mark it the size of my block here, which I believe is 10 inches. So I would start up in this corner, hold a finger down here, and just simply mark. And I can see that well enough to quilt on it now. And the way then my aunts would do it is they would eyeball the next one. And that's why they're so irregular. But this was a traditional way that quilters had, many years ago to do it. A friend of mine out in New York developed another method. He did the same concept, but he put it on a band of plastic. And the way this is done is you will put it down in the bottom here, and then with a pencil of some color, simply take and mark it like so. Same concept as the string, but a modern day version of that. And then because this is ruled every inch or half inch or whatever this measurement is, very easy to mark it in the space and then pick here and go to the next one. And then the other method we have is the stencil that I developed this year in various sizes, which again has the same concept. Put your dot down here. These marks are marked for you. So that's marking your quilt. One of the almost final actions that you make in completing your quilt on your journey to quilt as desired. Very simple. Think first, actually, how much quilting does my quilt need and how does it need to be quilted? And then what tool do you need? Because what works for you may not work for me. And remember, always test before you put it on your final quilt top. Glad to have you. Glad you were with us. Hope you come back. We still have more to talk about on your long journey, which is shortening now to quilt as desired.